It's weird to say, but it feels like 2024 was the least confident that people have felt in Patrick Mahomes and in the Kansas City Chiefs. Even though they had a 15-2 record, this team had controversial win after controversial win, and after it all, they found themselves in the Super Bowl. The luck of the regular season ran out in that championship game, though. It was a 40-22 loss, but it really was never close throughout that game. And it was in that game that the Kansas City Chiefs were somewhat outclassed throughout those 60 minutes. The offensive line got beat, much like they did when Kansas City lost in the Super Bowl to Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers a few years back. And the lack of a run game also forced Patrick Mahomes to stand behind that shaky line all game, and the result was very ugly for the Chiefs. That shakiness from the offensive line and the offense as a whole through the regular season overshadowed a pretty good season for the defense. Fourth in points allowed and ninth in total yards allowed. The Chiefs saw their super youthful secondary, highlighted by Trent McDuffie and Brian Cook, have a year to remember. And while there wasn't a true superstar pass rusher on the team, it was Chris Jones who kind of had a slightly down year. George Karlaftis had a decent season and was rewarded with a pretty lucrative contract just a few weeks ago. Tershawn Wharton, I think, was kind of the guy that was the unsung hero for the Chiefs D-line this year. 6.5 sacks, and was a guy constantly just showing up in big moments. To be honest, though, I feel like at the end of the year, the Kansas City Chiefs as an entire organization, whether it was the coaching staff, the front office, the players, I think they were ready to just be over last year. Whether they won the Super Bowl or not, they just were ready to kind of, I wouldn't say restart, but just start anew in a year. On the field, there were constant times where it just seemed like the Chiefs were off. Off the field, there was constant social media, national media attention, and it just seemed to kind of zap the guys a little bit. The Chiefs went into the offseason with a few goals, improve up front, and try to make Patrick Mahomes' life just a little bit stressful. I think part of helping Patrick Mahomes was just getting healthy. Guys like Rashee Rice, who missed all but 4 games last year, and Hollywood Brown, who came back really just for the postseason run, are 2 players at the wide receiver position where you start and go through hopefully the full season, and you have 2 great weapons, not to mention if the Chiefs are able to get a good year out of Travis Kelce. But improving the offensive line started with bringing in some competition for the right tackle spot. Jawan Taylor is probably the most talked about non-blindside blocker of this decade, mostly due to his pre-snap movements and the lack of penalties enforced on him. The Chiefs gave Taylor some competition in the form of San Francisco 49ers offensive lineman Jalen Moore. Moore played the left side for the San Francisco 49ers last year after Trent Williams went down with an injury, and currently is placed at second string at right tackle. Left tackle, more than likely going to be locked down by 2025 first-round pick Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. He steps in to stop the revolving door at left tackle. That position was last occupied by Joe Thuney, and speaking of Thuney, probably the biggest guy to replace this offseason was Joe Thuney. He's either been first or second team All-Pro the last 3 seasons, and he was traded to the Chicago Bears early in the offseason process. And currently, the Chiefs have Kingsley Suamataia in that spot. Defensively, the Chiefs spent a lot of draft capital to improve this defense. They added Omar, Norman Lott, Ashton Hilote, Jeffrey Bassa, and Noel Williams. 4 guys who, we've seen with the Chiefs for a long time now. They always have 1 or 2 rookies or second-year players on the defense. Last year, it was Jaden Hicks. The years before that, it's been guys like Trent McDuffie, Brian Cook, that come in and bring really great and solid play in their first or second years. And those 4 names that I just mentioned, those are the next kind of crop of guys that the Chiefs are looking to get something out of. But I also think a lot of the success of this defense as a whole is going to hinge on how the secondary does. They brought in Christian Fulton to be the number one cornerback opposite of Trent McDuffie. And with other guys like Jaden Hicks, Brian Cook, Mike Edwards, who they also signed from Tampa Bay, this is a really good young secondary. It's a secondary that's produced a lot. Trent McDuffie has been a highly, highly touted cornerback for a few years now. And so if Christian Fulton comes in and he's a good pairing with Trent McDuffie, this is going to take the secondary to an even higher level than they've been playing at. Looking at the schedule for Kansas City, I don't really see it as one that's overly difficult. Yes, you have games where you play the Ravens, Lions, Commanders, Bills, and your obvious in-division teams as well. I don't necessarily see this as a super tough schedule. I mean, you have some pretty easier games on the road, like at New York Giants, at Jacksonville Jaguars, at the Titans, at the Raiders. It seems like those are pretty easy teams to kind of not really get a bye week against, but it's an easier team to face on the road as compared to the home games where they really see a bulk of the top end teams that they're going to play. They have Philly, Baltimore, Detroit, Washington, Houston, and the Chargers at home. Those are all teams that either made the playoffs last year, won the Super Bowl, or won their division. And so to get all of those teams at home compared to on the road, I think is something that I don't want to say rewards the Chiefs, but it bodes better for the Chiefs having those tougher teams at home. Now, looking at the schedule in terms of record, this team could easily, I think, win 12 to 15 games. I think 12 is probably their floor, 15 is probably their ceiling. And then once you get to the playoffs, I think they're still winning the division. I think the Broncos are going to make it interesting late, but I think Kansas City still wins the division. I still think they probably win a playoff game or two. And then once we get to the championship round, if it's them versus Buffalo, I'd probably pick Kansas City. If it's them versus Baltimore, that's a toss-up for me. It would kind of depend on how Baltimore's main guys are playing at that point. But Baltimore's really the only team I see equally, if not more talented than Kansas City. You can bring up Cincinnati if you really want with the top-end talent. But I think when you look at the depth of Cincinnati, it doesn't necessarily compare, in my opinion, to Kansas City. And then I think the Super Bowl is easily within reach for this team again. I think they had a pretty good motive to get healthy, get better in the offseason, improve the offensive line, and see just how much they really need around Mahomes to still get a Super Bowl out of him. If his talent and his ability is of that otherworldly level that people kind of put him at before last year. And I think he still probably has it. It's been one tough year for Mahomes and the Chiefs, but I think 2025, they're going to come into it a lot fresher. They're going to come into it with probably less expectations, which might help them. And they're going to come in with hopefully one of the better teams or a better team than they had last year.